I love the smell of napalm in the morning. Apocalypse. Now wasn't just a war film, it was a war in itself. What audiences saw as a surreal Vietnam epic was forged through chaos. A typhoon that destroyed sets, a lead actor collapsing from a heart attack, a director threatening to abandon everything, and a cast spiraling into madness as cameras kept rolling. This wasn't a movie, it was a haunted battlefield where the line between cinema and reality collapsed. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on 20 weird facts about Apocalypse Now, the most cursed and chaotic production in Hollywood history. And wait until you hear the bonus fact at the end, because it involves something so strange, even Coppola himself refused to talk about it publicly for years. Stay with us. Let's dive in. Marlon Brando showed up overweight and unprepared. When Francis Ford Coppola cast Marlon Brando as Colonel Kurtz, he imagined a lean, battle-hardened warrior. What arrived in the Philippines was a bloated Brando weighing nearly 300 pounds, shaven-headed, and with no preparation. Brando hadn't even read Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, the novel the film was based on. Coppola panicked. With millions already invested, firing Brando wasn't an option. Instead, the director improvised, shooting Brando mostly in shadow, dressing him in black, and turning his physicality into part of Kurtz's mystery. Brando then demanded long private discussions with Coppola before each scene, speaking in cryptic monologues that forced entire rewrites. The result? A performance born not of precision, but pure improvisation. What audiences didn't know was that Kurtz's unsettling presence was partly Coppola's desperate solution to an actor who refused to play by the rules. Dr. Martin Sheen's on-set heart attack nearly ended the film. Halfway through filming, Martin Sheen, already stressed, drinking heavily and pushing his body to extremes, collapsed on set with a massive heart attack at only 36 years old. Coppola didn't tell the studio. He knew the insurance company would shut down production. Instead, Sheen was rushed to a Manila hospital under secrecy, while his brother, Joe Estevez, acted as his stand-in for wide shots and voiceover recordings. Coppola lied to the crew, saying Sheen was suffering from heat exhaustion. But the truth was far darker. The star of the film nearly died. And his recovery was so fragile, Coppola later confessed he expected Sheen to die before shooting was finished. Watching Willard's haunted face on screen, audiences were unknowingly seeing a man literally fighting for his life between takes. The typhoon that wiped out entire sets. The Philippine jungle wasn't just a backdrop, it was an enemy. In May 1976, Typhoon Olga slammed into Coppola's production base, destroying entire villages and ripping through million-dollar sets. Helicopters, boats, and cameras were grounded for weeks. The French plantation set was obliterated, forcing Coppola to abandon storylines and reschedule massive sequences. Insurance companies demanded answers. The studio panicked. But Coppola pressed on, sinking deeper into financial ruin. He mortgaged his home, his vineyards, and even his own studio to keep filming alive. What audiences didn't see in the theatrical cut was the ghost of Olga, a storm that nearly drowned the entire project. Apocalypse Now wasn't delayed by months. It was kept alive only by Coppola's willingness to risk bankruptcy on his dream of cinematic madness. Real helicopters, real chaos. Coppola struck a deal with the Philippine military to use real helicopters for the iconic Ride of the Valkyries sequence. But the arrangement came with a brutal catch. The helicopters weren't under Coppola's control. The Philippine Air Force would often recall them mid-shoot to fight actual insurgents in nearby conflicts. Imagine the chaos. Cameras rolling, Wagner blasting, extras screaming, and then, suddenly, helicopters flying off to real war. The production had to halt, props abandoned, actors left sweating in the heat. Coppola's frustration was volcanic, yet the unpredictability gave the sequence a strange authenticity. The chaos wasn't staged, it was real. The Valkyrie's attack scene feels unhinged because it was half movie magic, half military reality, with the director caught in the crossfire. Dennis Hopper was too high to remember his lines. When Coppola hired Dennis Hopper as the manic photojournalist, he didn't expect Hopper's real-life drug addiction to dominate the set. Hopper showed up stoned, drunk, and unable to memorize dialogue. He clashed constantly with Brando, who refused to be in the same room with him. Coppola resorted to filming Hopper in wild, fragmented takes, letting him rant and improvise lines like, "This is the way the fucking world ends." The director later admitted he had to hide Hopper's drugs just to get coherent performances. But Hopper's mania ended up working perfectly. His incoherent energy mirrored the breakdown of civilization in Kurtz's compound. What audiences didn't know was that Hopper wasn't acting. He was unraveling before the camera, and Coppola turned that collapse into cinematic gold. Coppola threatened to kill himself during production. Francis Ford Coppola's obsession with Apocalypse now pushed him to the brink of madness. With spiraling costs, constant delays, and studio pressure mounting, the director once confessed to the crew, "We are in the jungle. We had too much money. We had too much equipment. And little by little, we went insane." At one point he broke down, admitting he had considered suicide because he feared the film was a failure. Coppola wasn't exaggerating. The shoot stretched from 16 weeks to more than a year, with investors pulling out and critics already sharpening knives. He poured his own money into the production, risking financial collapse. The irony is chilling. The descent into madness on screen reflected Coppola's own. Apocalypse Now wasn't just about Kurtz losing his mind. It was about Coppola staring into the same abyss. The opening hotel room scene was shot during a real breakdown. The haunting opening sequence, where Captain Willard spirals into a drunken meltdown in a Saigon hotel room, wasn't staged. Martin Sheen was genuinely intoxicated, wrestling with depression and substance abuse. Coppola encouraged him to let go, filming the chaos as Sheen smashed a mirror, cut his hand, and collapsed in tears. Crew members wanted to stop, but Coppola kept rolling, capturing Sheen's raw pain. The actor later admitted he was close to a nervous breakdown and begged for the cameras to stop. Coppola refused, believing the moment captured Willard's true darkness. What ended up in the final cut wasn't a performance. It was a man breaking apart on camera, bleeding and drunk. The blurred line between art and exploitation still divides critics today, but the result remains one of cinema's most visceral openings. The crew feared the shoot was cursed by the third month of delays. Whispers spread across the jungle set. Apocalypse Now was cursed. Typhoons, illness, breakdowns, even death stalked the production. Local crew members believed the spirits of the Philippines were punishing them for disturbing sacred land. Coppola's wife Eleanor documented the eerie atmosphere in her journals, later revealed in the documentary Hearts of Darkness. Actors fell sick from malaria. Technical equipment failed without explanation. Locals muttered about bad omens. Coppola himself seemed possessed, speaking in riddles and demanding impossible shots. Some crew genuinely feared they wouldn't survive the ordeal. The sense of dread seeped into the dailies. Apocalypse Now didn't just depict madness, it created it. What audiences didn't know is that the haunting aura around Kurtz's compound wasn't just set design. It was the atmosphere of a shoot people believed was truly doomed. Harvey Keitel was originally cast as Willard before Martin Sheen. It was Harvey Keitel who stepped into Captain Willard's boots. Coppola cast him after seeing his raw performance in Mean Streets. But weeks into shooting, Coppola realized Keitel wasn't working. He felt Keitel was too New York tough guy and lacked the internal torment he needed for Willard. Against his studio's advice, and after burning through weeks of costly footage, Coppola fired Keitel. The decision nearly bankrupted the project further. Bringing in Martin Sheen required reshoots from the ground up. The irony? Sheen himself nearly didn't survive the shoot. In hindsight, Keitel's firing remains one of Hollywood's most brutal casting changes. The footage with him as Willard is locked away, largely unseen. What audiences watched was Plan B. Apocalypse Now's journey into madness began the moment Coppola gambled on recasting his lead in the middle of the jungle. The famous cow slaughter was 100% real. One of the most disturbing sequences in Apocalypse Now shows a water buffalo being slaughtered by natives. What shocks audiences even today is that the killing was not staged. Coppola captured a real ritual sacrifice performed by local tribes. No Hollywood effects, no props, just raw reality filmed alongside Kurtz's assassination. Animal rights activists were outraged when the truth surfaced, but Coppola defended it, saying it mirrored the primal brutality at the film's heart. The MPAA reluctantly allowed the footage, though it remains one of the most controversial moments in mainstream cinema. The horror audiences felt wasn't simulated. It was genuine blood, genuine death, and genuine ritual captured forever on celluloid. Coppola's wife secretly documented the madness. While Francis Ford Coppola wrestled with chaos, his wife Eleanor quietly filmed behind the scenes. What started as simple home movies became a secret chronicle of a collapsing production. She captured Coppola screaming at actors, wandering through the jungle in despair, and confessing fears that the movie was a $20 million disaster. Her tapes later became the foundation for the 1991 documentary Hearts of Darkness, a filmmaker's apocalypse. Audiences finally saw how far Coppola had unraveled. Eleanor revealed that her husband carried tape recorders everywhere, speaking his fears aloud, fearing bankruptcy, artistic failure, even madness. What audiences didn't know in 1979 was that Apocalypse Now was eating Coppola alive, and his wife was the only witness brave enough to capture it. The result wasn't just a film about war, it was the documentation of a family consumed by it. Lawrence Fishburne lied about his age to get in. Lawrence Fishburne was just 14 when he auditioned for the role of Clean, a teenage gunner, but he told Coppola he was 17, and the director believed him. Fishburne then spent 2 years in the Philippine jungle, exposed to drugs, chaos, and warlike conditions, still a child in reality. He later admitted that the trauma of filming scarred him for years, saying, "I saw things no teenager should ever see." Coppola, unaware of the deception, pushed Fishburne into harrowing battle sequences, including scenes where his character dies in a hail of bullets. Ironically, Fishburne's youth gave his death scene its haunting authenticity. The horror on screen wasn't just acting, it was a child's bewildered terror captured forever. What audiences didn't know was that one of Apocalypse Now's most heartbreaking performances came from an actor who hadn't even reached adulthood. The script was rewritten, constantly. Apocalypse Now began as John Milius's screenplay, a tight and brutal adaptation of Heart of Darkness. But by the time Coppola finished, it was barely recognizable. Pages were rewritten daily on set. Coppola improvised entire sequences, letting actors riff for hours. Brando's scenes were written overnight, tailored to his rambling thoughts. Dennis Hopper's lines were scrawled on scraps of paper just minutes before filming. Even Sheen admitted he never knew what story he was telling. Coppola famously told the crew, "We had no ending. We were making it up as we went along." The chaos turned the film into a cinematic fever dream. What audiences didn't know was that Apocalypse Now wasn't following a script. It was stumbling through madness. And that lack of order became its greatest strength, turning incoherence into poetry. The Kurtz compound was built in secret. The towering Kurtz compound wasn't just a set, it was an obsession. Coppola ordered the construction of massive jungle temples, statues, and labyrinths without telling the studio how much it cost. Built deep in the Philippine rainforest, it became a real city, complete with living quarters for the crew. Locals believed the area was cursed, and some workers quit after accidents during construction. Coppola spent weeks filming endless footage inside the compound, much of it unused, but he refused to tear it down. The eerie silence, the firelit rituals, the decapitated heads, all came from Coppola's vision of a lost civilization collapsing in on itself. What audiences didn't know was that Kurtz's world wasn't just cinematic illusion, it was a fully functioning village, hidden from Hollywood accountants, left to rot in the jungle when the crew finally abandoned it. The original ending was completely different. The ending of Apocalypse now remains one of the most debated in cinema history, but what few know is that Coppola originally planned an entirely different climax. Instead of Willard killing Kurtz in silence, Coppola wanted U.S. helicopters to attack Kurtz's compound in a massive firefight. He even shot footage of explosions and battles. But when he watched the dailies, Coppola realized the spectacle undercut the haunting tone. Instead, he reshaped the ending into something quieter, more mythical. The version we see, a ritualistic assassination mirrored with the slaughter of the buffalo, was born from desperation and last-minute edits. The alternate ending was buried, though clips later surfaced in documentaries. What audiences didn't know was that Apocalypse Now could have ended as a war spectacle, but Coppola chose to close with poetry instead of carnage. Harrison Ford's tiny role was a studio concession. When Harrison Ford appears briefly as Colonel Lucas in Apocalypse Now, it seems like a blink-and-you'll-miss-it cameo. But his casting wasn't accidental. Ford was just coming off Star Wars, and the studio pressured Coppola to include a rising star to boost box office appeal. Coppola reluctantly agreed, handing Ford a small but symbolic role, the nervous messenger delivering Willard his mission orders. Dressed in a clean uniform, Ford represented the sanitized, bureaucratic face of the war, detached from the jungle chaos. The irony is that Ford's presence was meant to be a marketing hook, yet Coppola minimized his screen time. What audiences didn't know was that one of the world's biggest stars was inserted into Apocalypse Now, not by artistic choice, but by studio compromise, proof that even Coppola couldn't fully escape Hollywood's grip. The movie bankrupted Coppola. Almost Coppola believed so deeply in Apocalypse Now that he gambled everything. He mortgaged his Napa Valley estate, his winery, even his private assets, pouring millions into the film when the studio threatened to pull funding. At one point, he owed over $30 million, a devastating sum, in the late 1970s. If the movie had flopped, Coppola would have lost everything: home, career, legacy. He confessed later, "My greatest fear was not that the film wouldn't be good, but that people would laugh at it." The financial strain nearly crushed him. When Apocalypse Now premiered, its success saved Coppola from ruin, but the scars lingered. What audiences didn't know is that every shot they watched was paid for not by a studio system, but by a man mortgaging his life to finish a vision no one else believed in. The Cannes premiere ended in chaos. When Apocalypse Now premiered at the 1979 Cannes Film Festival, it wasn't even finished. Coppola rushed an incomplete cut, complete with missing sound and rough edits. The reaction was explosive. Audiences were stunned, confused, even angered. Some critics booed, others called it a masterpiece. Coppola won the Palme d'Or, but not before telling reporters, "My film is not about Vietnam. It is Vietnam. The way we made it was the way Americans were in Vietnam." His words stunned the press. The premiere wasn't a victory march. It was a declaration that filmmaking could be as chaotic as war itself. What audiences didn't know was that they weren't watching a polished movie in Cannes. They were watching a director's battlefield diary, raw and unfinished, that still managed to reshape cinematic history overnight. Two versions, two different films, Apocalypse now exists in multiple incarnations. The original 1979 theatrical cut ran about 2.5 hours, but Coppola later revisited the project, releasing Apocalypse Now Redux in 2001, adding nearly 50 minutes of footage, including the French plantation sequence, extended Kurtz material, and surreal interludes. Fans were divided. Some felt the longer cut deepened the film's themes, while others believed it dragged into self-indulgence. Then, in 2019, Coppola unveiled Apocalypse Now, Final Cut, trimming Redux into a tighter balance. Each version feels like a different movie, one streamlined, one sprawling, one refined. What audiences didn't know was that Coppola never truly finished Apocalypse Now. Like Kurtz's Jungle Empire, the film kept mutating over decades, reflecting the restless mind of its creator. The war never ended, it just kept editing itself. The shoot lasted more than a year. Originally scheduled for 16 weeks, Apocalypse Now's production ballooned into a grueling 238-day shoot in the Philippine jungle. Cast and crew endured unbearable heat, torrential rain, disease, and endless reshoots. Many lost weight. Others collapsed. Coppola himself shed over 100 pounds from stress. The set became a prison, and some actors compared it to being trapped in an actual war zone. Eleanor Coppola wrote that every day felt like a year. The endless grind warped everyone involved, making reality indistinguishable from fiction. By the time cameras finally stopped, Coppola had shot over 1.5 million feet of film. What audiences didn't know was that Apocalypse Now wasn't filmed in a jungle, it was survived in one. The movie's madness wasn't artifice. It was lived experience, etched into every exhausted face and haunted glance on screen. Bonus fact: the ghost rumors of the Philippine jungle crew members whispered about strange presences around the set. Locals insisted the jungle was haunted, warning Coppola not to film on certain sacred grounds. After multiple accidents, including near-fatal injuries and unexplained equipment failures, rumors spread that the production had angered ancestral spirits. Some crew swore they heard voices at night. Others claimed to see figures moving in the trees. Coppola dismissed it publicly, but privately admitted to Eleanor that the jungle felt alive and hostile. Whether superstition or stress-induced hallucination, the stories persisted. What audiences didn't know was that behind the explosions and gunfire, some crew believed they were filming on cursed land. Apocalypse Now didn't just capture the madness of war, it awakened ghosts that refused to stay silent. Apocalypse Now was more than a film. It was a descent into chaos, a battle with nature, with money, with sanity itself. It left scars on everyone involved, but it also changed cinema forever. Coppola set out to adapt Conrad's Heart of Darkness. What he created instead was his own,